Okay, so hello, good morning to everyone, and welcome to our session for this morning. Okay, so for today, my dear students, what we are going to be focusing on would be the different types of eating habits. Okay, now what we're going to be doing is that I'm going to be showing to you, okay, a series of different types of dietary plans. Okay, because what we are actually looking after here would be the idea of how do people choose their diet programs. Okay, now based on what we have seen last time, or based on the discussions that we have done last time, we actually focus on the main ideas of how do people, or how should we nourish ourselves, and how should we be observing our dietary programs. Okay. And to that note, a lot of us are still in that notion that whatever we put inside in our mouth is actually okay for as long as we are actually doing physical activity. But then again, we have to remember that whatever food, okay, whatever we eat, the amount that we're going to be eating, and how often are we going to be following that type of a eating habit depends, or still depends, or 80% will actually answer in how would you look like, okay, in the future. So with that, my dear students, what I'm going to be, or what we are going to be doing today, today is actually going to be a very, very tasteful morning, okay, for everyone here in drug education, consumer health, and eating habits. And technically, you're going to be finding out the different ways in how to handle different types of programs, so that we would have an idea on how is it being conducted. So I'll be giving you, okay, a list on what are we are going to be watching for this morning. Okay. So first one is that we are going to be viewing the main idea of what is vegan diet. Okay. Next is the idea of a keto diet program. Okay. Next would be the South Beach diet. Okay. And then we're going to be moving to sport specific diets like the strongman diet. Okay. Bodybuilding cheat day diet. Okay, and a bodybuilding health eating challenge. Okay, eating clean as much as possible, and then we are going to be applying this to nutrition and health, or nutrition of student athletes. Okay, so without further ado, my dear students, okay, here are the following videos that are we are going to be viewing.
January, a time where we take our first steps towards our New Year's resolutions and try to become the best versions of ourselves. Am I right? And even though some goals revolve around climbing mountains or finally making this the year where you learn how to dance, most people's resolutions focus on one main thing: health. And in recent years, one health trend stands out above most.
Vegan diet has more than doubled in the last year.
Veganism is defined as a diet that excludes all animal derived products like meat, eggs, and dairy products. It even includes honey. And in the past decade, the trend has skyrocketed. In the US, consumers identifying as vegan grew from 1% all the way up to 6%, and that number has continued to increase as more and more documentaries such as Game Changers and Cowspiracy have come out in support of the diet due to not only health benefits, but also environmental and animal cruelty prevention. And so, to fully put this diet to the test and see if it actually has the health benefits everybody claims, Matt decided to go on the vegan diet for a full 30 days to answer a few questions. How difficult will it be to change? How will his energy be affected? And will he decide to continue this vegan diet after the 30-day trial?
We're going to see where your deficiencies currently are on your past diet, implement the vegan diet, and see how much of an improvement we can get.
Amazing.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
ready.
Your red blood cells being a little bit low at 4.29. One of the big things we want to see here is where do you get great sources of heme and iron from? Kind of the big one that people are concerned about when they're switching to a vegan diet is their vitamin B12. And prior to switching, your levels still aren't optimal. Rich greens, spirulina, great sources of B12.
Okay.
But really, truly, we can improve all of these numbers with the vegan diet.
Amazing. I want to see all that green when I come back. No bad grades.
No bad grades.
Blood work is done. Now time to get on this diet and do it right. Starting today, I'm going vegan. I tried to go vegan a year ago. I tried for 6 days, and by the end of the 6 days, I was completely and utterly exhausted. I hadn't had no experts, nobody that was actually vegan tell me how to do it. So what I've done is I've gathered several experts, athletes, nutritionists, doctors, to help me throughout this process. To begin, I'm gonna be meeting with Dr. Matthew Letterman, who works with Whole Foods, who's written books on this, and he is gonna take me grocery shopping and make sure I buy all the right ingredients and all the right foods. I've always convinced myself that I need to eat meat for protein, for energy. So this is gonna be challenging every single nutritional idea that I've ever had in my head. Let's go meet Matthew and let the day begin.
Your very own snack combo with your signature look. Sa McSavers Mix and Match, mas maraming choices na sulit.
You all know the saying, ladies first.
Happy anniversary!
Thank you. Well, today, I'm that lady.
Hey guys, can I play?
Sure, come on.
I'm making the first move. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes.
Yan. We're going to New York?
Wow!
I am standing my own ground. Some might be surprised. Others might not care. But only I can decide when this lady will go first.
Matt, thank you again for coming.
Yeah, thanks for
It's
having
good to
me.
have you here. Have you noticed differences in how people react to a vegan diet?
It's really what you're eating, and we like to say whole foods plant-based. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains and starchy vegetables, legumes, and then some nuts and seeds. What you want to get rid of is the processed foods.
And obviously the question that every single vegan gets is how do you get enough protein?
Every plant food has protein. So if you're getting your 2,000 calories a day or whatever you need, you're going to blow away the amount of essential amino acids you need.
I mean, that's a perfect segue into what we're about to do next.
Yeah.
Which is, you're gonna help me grocery shop.
Yeah,
As a grown man, is, I have to admit, slightly embarrassing. But I need help. Should we go shopping?
let's do it.
Let's do it.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Show me. So this is what it all looks like. The good news is that I get to eat a lot more than I'm used to. Hell yes. The odd thing about this is that here I have to be very aware of everything that I'm putting into my body. So it's a great exercise in awareness and self-awareness of what we're consuming. In the meantime, I'm gonna have some dinner. This is Matt's breakfast, ladies and gentlemen. We've got 2 nice little nutritional bars, some seaweed, dried mangoes, lots of almonds, apple, banana. I'm like literally trying to load up as much as I can. Like I'm eating more than I think is normal. In about 3 hours, we're gonna meet with a vegan bodybuilder, and he hopefully is gonna make me feel good about myself and say that I'm doing things right. I'm trying to gain muscle, you know, which is why I want to talk to this bodybuilder, because I'm trying to be a bodybuilder. Don't tell the guys. Anyways.
What up, bro?
How you doing, Matt? Nice to meet you.
Nimai, nice to meet you, man.
Nimai has been vegan his entire life. Well, vegetarian initially,
yeah.
and then vegan ever since.
5 years.
What's been the key to fitness?
It's always dependent on the person, right? Whatever their goals are. I wanted to compete. I figured if I could do it as a vegan and show that you can not only like live and thrive on a vegan diet, but you could be like a top level bodybuilder, so then maybe it would kind of like change that notion. But it's still every single day I get it. Like, where do you get your protein? I'm like, dude, do I look like I'm struggling to get protein here? Like, it's like a freaking calling card for veganism. Like, do you get enough protein? I'm just like, yeah.
Well, I feel like a freaking twig next to you.
That it's just a different shape.
It's a different, like, smaller shape.
Get him
The little brother. Bean and rice burrito. Time to munch on this Justin Bieber style, baby. The snacks and the lunches and the dinners are all so tasty. The one thing about this is just like, I feel like I'm constantly thinking about food and what I need to consume. It's like almost like a job to make sure that you're on top of your nutrition. And I hope that this is just temporary, because if it's always like this and you always have to think about what you're eating next and all of that, then it's just like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go crazy. On to day 5 tomorrow. After 1 week of going vegan, I was honestly feeling great. But I wanted to better understand the vegan community as a whole and see how veganism can help people who aren't necessarily professional athletes. All right, we are on our way to a dinner hosted by Robbie Barbaro. Robbie is the founder of a company called Mastering Diabetes, and he uses plant-based whole foods to help himself and others overcome diabetes.
What's up, man? How you doing, man? Good to meet you. You have persimmons? You like persimmons?
Never had a persimmon.
Never had a persimmon. This is a high chia persimmon. If you tried to eat that early, it would taste like chalk. You can have a fuyu variety. Okay. This is a giant fuyu.
Wow.
This is a chocolate high chia. All right. So,
where are all these fruits coming from? Do you only eat fruit?
So I eat fruits, greens, and non-starchy vegetables. People with diabetes are scared of fruit, they're scared of potatoes, they're scared of rice. But we teach them the more of those you eat, the better your diabetes health. Eating too much fat, particularly saturated fat, causes insulin resistance.
Okay.
So when you take out the fat, you can eat the carbohydrates without having insulin spikes.
And is meat a high fat?
Meat is, yes. Even lean meats are still higher in fat. We have over 100 million people in the US alone that have either type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes.
Really?
100 million.
A third of the population?
Yes.
What? And have you been able to reverse diabetes for type 2s?
Absolutely. We have lots of testimonials. We had a man come to us. He was told he needed 6 bypasses. Decided, you know what, I'm going to watch this information. I'm going to apply this out of the bypasses for now and see what happens. And he didn't need them.
Wow.
So he reversed his heart disease and avoided 6 bypass surgeries.
Oh my God.
Magic man.
You are the magic man.
Nice to meet you, Matt.
Brian.
Nice to meet you, Brian.
You too. So I was watching Taco Bell commercial, and I was like, I kind of want Taco Bell. Like, obviously, I can't have Taco Bell. I mean, I can if I wanted to, but I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to recreate it just using plants, so...
What the hell?
So then you get that.
So good.
That's incredible.
And then you just douse. And the guacamole is like, come on, really? After you eat it, you're like, oh wow, I feel kind of amazing.
I think that is the best part, actually. After you eat, you don't feel like you need to take a 2-hour nap.
I crush food.
But it's cool because you can crush food and not feel guilty about it.
Here's the mac and cheese. Dip it super hard.
Every single bite.
Wait. Uy, ano nga ulit yung nickname mo, Eduardo?
Oh my God. Dude.
That's so good.
It's like a restaurant.
So good.
At this point, I felt really good. and I was happy with everything I'd heard from my new vegan friends.
Yeah, so nice meeting you.
But now I wanted to get a perspective from someone who didn't believe that a vegan diet was the best diet to follow. And so the next day, I sat down to talk with Max Lugavere, author of the book Genius Foods, to get his take on veganism. Thanks for coming, dude.
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks for
you,
having
brother.
me. Yeah, same.
You got started in nutrition unexpectedly, like.
Correct. Yeah, I was a journalist and my mom got sick. She, at a very young age, developed the earliest symptoms of dementia. It sent me down the rabbit hole to try to understand why this would have happened to a woman at her age. You know, my mom was at the receiving end of nutritional information, magazines and newspapers and TV shows and things like that. Now I know that in many ways, some of the information that she was fed was not all that accurate, and that continues to happen to people all around the world. So I started reading study after study after study. In a nutshell, I've had a tremendous amount of exposure to this topic.
Is there anything that stuck out immediately that you were like, wow?
The standard American diet is poison. It involves 60% of your calories coming from ultra-processed foods. A vegan diet, a plant-based diet, is one way, but it's not the only way. Incorporating properly raised animal products can be perfectly healthy. We have nutrients that are called micronutrients, and I think when you look at the micronutrients that are offered in animal foods, I think they're invaluable to the body because they're already sort of in a plug-and-play format, ready to be utilized by the body.
Max, dude, the thing is, how do you even choose? Just like there's a new book, there's a new documentary, there's a new thing coming out every 2 seconds. But it does seem like the consensus is plants are good. Yeah, that's the consensus. But the fact that it's anything to an extreme may not be the right answer for most people.
There's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all diet. What works for you might not work for me. So at the end of the day, I would encourage your viewers to do research for themselves, look to get their information from unbiased and credible sources, and to be willing to iterate and tinker.
Thank you for saving me.
Yeah. My pleasure, man.
That's the answer. That's the answer.
How do you feel?
Confused, talking to only smart, well-studied people, and they have pretty different opinions about what I should be eating. I feel like if I were to do this right, I'd have to spend like a decade researching. Day 15, halfway there, and more confused than ever. From day 16 to day 26, I went traveling. And even though continuing with the vegan challenge while traveling was hard, it was actually pretty doable. The Syrian restaurant we're going to this morning here in Germany is hopefully vegan.
What do you mean, hopefully? He keeps saying that. It is vegan.
It is vegan.
Hey, man.
Otherwise, I have my nuts and my balls.
My nuts. Cool, man.
Thanks, dude. And by the time I came back, I was luckily able to sit down with the main person who inspired me to take on this challenge, James Wilks, the producer and protagonist of the hit documentary Game Changers. It's perfect. Amazing. Thank you, James. Nice to finally meet you, man. A little over a month ago is when I first saw Game Changers. Well done, man. It was so well done.
Yeah, very much.
Everybody's talking about it, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy. On some days, we'll have 500,000 people just going to the recipe page on our website.
Wow. My whole attempt in making this video is to kind of get all perspective. And I see you as like the front runner in this movement, in the vegan movement.
I personally believe that a fully plant-based diet is optimal for health and athletic performance. Any direction that you take towards more plant-based eating is going to be beneficial, replacing both animal foods and also, processed junk foods.
Gotcha. And do you find that a lot of people that go vegan just aren't educated on how to do it?
Any diet should be well planned. People should look into it and look about what they're putting in their body. You can't just take your current diet, take meat off the plate, and think you're good to go. But if you look at like nutrition deficiencies, on average, vegans are deficient in 4 nutrients. Meat eaters are deficient in 9. If you look at the World Health Organization or the FAO, they're all saying now to eat a diet that's predominantly plant.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense.
For me, the core is promoting plant-based eating, giving people the resources so that they don't fall off the bandwagon. Because a lot of times people don't know what to eat or where to eat or how to cook.
Well, James, I don't want to take much more of your time, but I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Talk to you soon. Cheers. Good luck with everything. Great guy. And everything you said makes sense. Yeah. Everybody I've talked to is so nice, and it literally makes so much sense every time. Last day, boy. I'm excited that I've completed my challenge. I guess we'll be able to tell at the blood work whether I've changed, but at least I don't feel worse. That's the main thing.
1, 2. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All set. You're welcome.
All right, time to get the blood results.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We're looking positive. Positive?
Your vitamin B12 actually improved, but that's from supplementing. So to say like a true vegan diet, your vitamin B12 is going to go up, you can't confidently say that. We actually saw a pretty sharp increase of your total testosterone. You know, whether or not the vegan diet is right for you, I'd say this is a huge positive benefit. Your TSH or your thyroid actually improved.
More thyroid. What's that?
What does thyroid do?
Thyroid is part of the liver.
Wrong. It has almost some effect on every body system. So energy, sleep, your T4 looks right. You've actually decreased the amount of blood stress you have. If you're eating more fish like salmon and tuna, yeah. So it's like when you want to eat on the diet, it's really your favorite source of health fats. You kind of our balance with protein levels actually make that up. Yeah. Can we surprise them?
That's amazing.
Then we want to look at your total iron. Actually improve the vegan iron.
That's crazy.
You're a phenomenon at this point.
It's that, especially with the number one thing I was worried about.
Yeah, your iron looks even better.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, of everything, plant-based is best for you. Or vegan diet is best for you.
Wow. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Yeah, of course.
All right. I did not expect the results to be that good. It's actually quite shocking. I kind of feel like I don't have a choice but to go majority plant-based now. The results were better after they were before, and I was already eating so healthy. I think I'll still have some animal product once in a while, but mostly plant-based. Because it is very restrictive, so it is nice to be able to pick for yourself what you want. And yeah, I guess we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for watching, and as we end this video and all of you have your wonderful New Year's resolutions coming up, some of those resolutions will involve online shopping. And so to make sure that you get the best prices online by finding all the coupons.
Okay, so online shopping, nasa Lazada yan. Okay, so anyway, that would be one example of a diet program that could be followed, wherein a lot of people have already started actually practicing. Actually, one of the most prominent athletes here in the Philippines, Alex Cabagno, who is a famous basketball player, has already started doing this type of diet. Okay, so the next one that we are going to be focusing on will be on the keto diet, and let's watch this video.
When you're getting started on a ketogenic diet, it's good to have something that you can reference. You can come back and look at. So this entire video will be time-stamped with very clear chapters. So you can either watch the whole thing right now, or you can save and bookmark this video and come back to little chapters that apply for given points when you're on your ketogenic journey. Okay, so I wanted to do this video as an updated 2023 version because so much has changed in the world of ketogenic research, and it's good to have a refresher to understand how to do it properly. So let's first jump in with what a ketogenic diet is, if you're brand new to this, or if you just need a refresher on it. Okay, a ketogenic diet is a fasting mimicking diet. Okay, what that means is we are reaping the benefits of a fast, but by having food in our system still. Because we get all these benefits that come from fasting, and we see that with epileptic patients in the early research in the 1920s, right? But we can't expect people to fast forever. So researchers found that, okay, if we just deprive the body of glucose, we can actually have these same benefits. So what the ketogenic diet is not, it's not just copious amounts of garbage meat and cheese. It's a very well-crafted diet with moderate amounts of protein, relatively high amounts of fat, low amounts of carbohydrates, and moderate to high amounts of vegetables. And now we're even seeing small amounts of fruit in there. So we're gonna go ahead and break it all down. Now, from a survival and sort of evolutionary standpoint, the reason the ketogenic diet works is because your blood glucose, your blood sugar, never goes down to zero. Okay, it's a common misconception that when you do keto and you don't eat carbs, you're gonna go hypoglycemic, and that's not the case. So what actually happens is being in a ketogenic state, as it's called, means that your liver is producing a different nutrient. It's producing ketones, and your liver is producing ketones because you are not consuming carbohydrates. So what happens is the brain needs glucose. So the brain starts sucking up a lot of the carbohydrates that are naturally floating through your bloodstream, even if you're not eating carbs. And what this would mean is that your muscles would starve, right? Well, the body doesn't want your muscles to starve. So in an effort to provide the brain with adequate amounts of carbohydrates and glucose, the body produces ketones. So the liver produces these ketones, and they fuel your body and to a certain extent fuel your brain. But the primary sort of evolutionary reason behind the ketogenic state is to actually allow the brain to soak up the glucose so that our body doesn't have to. Before we get into the how-to portion, we have to look at sustainability. And fortunately now we have new data.
My name is Christine. I live in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I went from working in healthcare to being a software engineer in 1 year. I like being able to make mistakes. Having that room to be able to fail, but knowing that I'm a person that's resilient, I'll keep trying at a problem until I come up with a solution. That did not exist for me in healthcare. I migrated to the US about 10, 11 years ago. All of my aunts across the US and Europe, back home in Trinidad, and my cousins, they're all nurses. So it felt like, okay, maybe we should pursue that path, and that's the safe way to do it. One of my friends, him and I, we were talking about my career goals, and he kept telling me, Christine, the amount of dedication you put into your job in healthcare administration, if you put that into tech, I can guarantee you'll see rewards. That planted the idea at the back of my head. I got on the Codecademy site, and there was this little survey that I took, and then it recommends courses to you within your interests based on those answers, and web development was it for me. Once I started seeing that I could type a bunch of text into a code editor and see an application or an interface, that's when I was like, okay, I like this. If I can find a project that improves accessibility in some way for someone, that is my dream project. I have family members that are dyslexic. Growing up in Trinidad, there wasn't an understanding of what being differently abled looked like. For me now, just even in my coding, I try to make things accessible by adding descriptions of pictures for people who use screen readers, or using certain colors for people who can't see certain colors. I feel now that I am where I wanted to be when I moved here. I feel so accomplished. My family is so used to the traditional route for education. But when I started showing my family members the applications and the things that I could build, they started getting pretty excited about it. Me being able to land a role and knowing that most of my training came from Codecademy, I think it's really impressive. My advice would be to create a plan for studying that covers the amount of hours you would want to dedicate towards studying, and do not give up. You're capable.
Since I discovered this tool, my cell phone keeps receiving these notifications all day. Can you see it? Thanks for watching this video. You received 16, 14, 17, and much more. Now, I get paid for watching all my favorites videos. It's quite simple and worthy, and you don't need any previous knowledge or an expensive device. Check this out. Doing 3 hours a day, I get around 350. In a week, I'll get the amount of 2,450. At the end of the month, there'll be 9,800 in my account. If you want to rush a bit more, you can do it for 6 hours a day and get 700 by watching videos. After a week, it will be the incredible amount of 4,900. And after a month, you'll get stunning 19,600. There are so many people winning big through this, just like me. Check it out.
I used to work a little over 8 hours a day at a fast food chain, and I earned an average of $1,600 a month. Since I joined, I'm already making an average income of $800 a week.
I used to be afraid to open my bank's app, and now I do it all the time. Let me show you. Let me tell you, I have never seen so much money in my bank account.
I'm working from the comfort of my home. I get to work my own hours, and I'm earning much more than I was at my last job.
Click in the button, Learn More, and you will be sent to this page, where you'll find the step-to-step in order to activate this tool in your device. So, click in, Learn More, and start receiving right now.
Data from 2022 from larger scale meta-analysis that show us, like, is the ketogenic diet sustainable? And the short answer is yes. And is it safe? And the short answer is yes. And a lot of even the opponents of the ketogenic diet have now turned a page and said, you know what, yeah, it does work equally and sometimes even better than other diets. There was a 2022 study published in Nutrient Reviews that found in the first year of a ketogenic diet, there were improvements in HDL cholesterol levels. There were improvements in triglyceride levels, improvements in fasting glucose and fasting insulin levels, and various other improvements upon lipid markers and glycemic markers, all the way up until 12 months. After 12 months, it was no better than other diets, but it wasn't worse or wasn't unsafe. So the point is that you have all these amazing things that happen inside of the first year, and after the first year, you can decide, hey, if I like this, I want to keep going with it, and if not, whatever, move on to something else, that's fine, you got a good year out of it. Then there was a study that was published in Diabetologia in 2022 that was a meta-analysis looking at over 20 papers, okay? And it determined that with all of this data compiled, that the ketogenic diet is a very viable dietary solution for metabolic syndrome. So for metabolic dysfunction, for mitochondrial issues, for potentially diabetes and things like insulin resistance. And the study said, and I paraphrase, quote, the ketogenic diet is a safe diet and provides promising approaches for metabolic syndrome, even if optimal carb proportion must be explored. What this means is two really cool things. It means, hey, actually we're seeing, like, they're recognizing that it is a safe and effective diet for metabolic syndrome, and it actually works really well, even if carbohydrate proportions need to be explored. What that means is that depending on activity level, we can actually ebb and flow how many carbohydrates we have. Before, it was kind of set in stone, be like, don't have more than 20. Well, things have evolved, and I've evolved. Like, I have sometimes 50, sometimes 60 grams of carbohydrates when I'm in a ketogenic state, depending on how much I'm exercising. We'll talk about that as we go. So let's go ahead and move right in to the fun stuff. So what ketosis is not. It's not junk food. It's not processed cheese. It's not all the hyperpalatable stuff that's out there these days. It's good, wholesome food, living as close to the earth as you can, eating a whole food diet. Let me get that across. It is not what people think it is. It's not just processed meat and cheese. It's also not diabetic ketoacidosis. That is not going to happen unless you are a type 1 diabetic. Ketoacidosis comes from when you do not produce insulin and ketone bodies get too high. This is not going to happen if you are a normal functioning human that produces insulin. If you are a type 1 diabetic, perhaps you need to investigate further. It is also not bad for the kidneys, even if the protein levels are higher, which they are on the ketogenic diet now compared to what we looked at 5 or 6 years ago. There was a study published in the British Journal of Nutrition, and I quote, low carb diets and corresponding high protein diets are not harmful for renal function. Okay, what this is saying is based upon the randomized control meta-analysis looking at multiple papers, no issue with the kidneys by going on a low carb diet or corresponding high protein diets that go with a low carb diet. So don't be freaking out there. It's not the end of the world. What should your macronutrient ratios look like now? Okay, we used to say more like lowish protein, like 20% protein. Now that we're understanding that protein does not kick you out of ketosis, okay, it does not. Protein is still good to go, and protein might be one of the main benefits of being on a ketogenic diet. We want to lean more towards 40 or 50% of our calories from protein, and we want to have about 40% of our calories from fat, and about 5 to 10%, depending on the activity level, from carbohydrates. When you look at the fats, you should be predominantly monounsaturated fats from avocados, from olive oil, from avocado oil, from macadamia nuts. Second to that, you want polyunsaturated fats from fish oil, from omega-3s, from some other nuts and seeds, things like that. You want about 20% of your fat calories to come from saturated fat. And the saturated fat that you should be trying to get more of is things like stearic acid, which is the most benign saturated fat, if you want to call it that. You're going to get that in good quality dairy. You're going to find myristic acid in dairy. So lean towards dairy as more of your saturated fat source whenever you can. Not saying that a good, nice cut of meat is bad, but you don't want to overdo it too much. When we say protein does not convert to glucose, we used to think that excess protein would turn into sugar, that it would stimulate what's called gluconeogenesis, where your body takes proteins and turns it into carbs because the body needs it. It turns out that gluconeogenesis is demand driven. Okay, this means that the body will only turn protein into glucose if you are actually demanding it, if there is a need for it. So it's not driven by supply. So you don't just eat protein and it magically turns into glucose. You only turn it into glucose if your body is in a serious deficit need for it. And that has nothing to do with what you supply it. That has more to do with, does it break it down from your tissue or not? So, which leads to the next question. Are you going to lose muscle on a ketogenic diet? Now the evidence is fairly clear that despite mild decreases in anaerobic performance and mild decreases in 1 and 2 rep maximum strength lifts, there really is no difference between the muscle loss that you would have on a ketogenic diet or the muscle loss that you would have on any other diet. As far as the research is concerned, there's been a little bit more of a regression to the mean, demonstrating that before we used to think that ketones were crazy muscle sparing and that they would spare leucine and that you could like really be in a heavy deficit and not break down muscle. But now we're starting to regress a little bit more towards the mean as we have more research. And what that means is we see, okay, yeah, there's actually some benefits like with ketones being present where you might spare a little bit more muscle, but really, it's just like anything else. It's like any other diet. What makes the keto diet more beneficial is that you're more satiated generally and you don't have as much of a desire to eat. So it's easier to be in that deficit. And generally speaking, you're eating more protein because carbs aren't in the equation. So you have more protein available as far as your calories are concerned. So you prevent catabolism that way, you prevent muscle breakdown that way. All in all, the ketogenic diet is very safe as a way to lose weight and spare muscle, contrary to what people believe. Let's talk about how to get into ketosis here, because these are 6 very important steps and some of them have changed. The first thing I want you to do outside of course, cutting out the carbohydrates, that's the obvious thing. Stop the nighttime snacking. This sounds so minute and minuscule and nuancy, but it's very important. There are studies now that demonstrate that insulin sensitivity is jeopardized quite a bit when you eat late at night or even into the evening hours. So for the first week getting into ketosis, my stark recommendation be to stop eating at like 5 or 6 p.m. Commit to that for a week, because what it'll do is it'll allow your nighttime fasting period overnight to be a couple hours longer than it normally is. For every hour that you're not eating and you're longer into a fast, if we want to call it that, that gives you so much more horsepower in terms of how quickly you get into ketosis. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is increase your poly and monounsaturated fats. Don't just dive into keto and do a bunch of saturated fats in the beginning. Okay, the evidence is pretty clear, it's very clear, that poly and monounsaturated fats convert into ketones faster than saturated fats. Saturated fats take a long time to break down because they're saturated and there's lots of carbon chains that are bound together. So they have to be cleaved off and that takes a while. Poly and monounsaturated fats are easier to break down in the body enzymatically, and therefore they also convert into ketones significantly faster. So when it comes down to wanting to create ketones fast, macadamia nuts, olive oil, olives in general, avocados, avocado oil, some good nuts, fish oil, things like that. Those are the things, and even MCT oil, although technically, in a weird way, that's a saturated fat, but that is a very complex discussion. But MCT oil is also great. Number 3, I would recommend you do 3 days of glycogen depletion style workouts. That sounds monumentally scary. No, all that means is go to the gym, do resistance training, and train a little bit of every body part. Do 2 to 3 sets of every body part. What this is going to do, it should only be like a 30 to 50 minute workout. You just want to train your whole body with resistance training because that's going to suck up all the glycogen as much as you possibly can for those 3 days. The quicker that you can burn through your glycogen stores, the carbohydrates that's stored in your muscle, the quicker you can tap into using fat. So you have to get through that first layer of stored carbohydrates in your muscles first. And the best way to do that is glycogen depletion workouts. So go in there, do 2 or 3 sets of squats, then do 2 or 3 sets of shoulder press, 2 or 3 sets of chest press, 2 or 3 sets of lat pull downs. Just burn up the glycogen. Then after day 3, start doing low intensity cardio, like zone 2, so your maximum heart rate is maybe like 65 to 70% of your max heart rate, okay? That is going to, once the carbohydrates are depleted, aerobic activity and cardio mobilizes fat. Mobilizing fat is always a good thing, but if you're not glycogen depleted, the mobilization of fat is just going to go through beta oxidation. It's not going to go through actually going through the liver and converting into ketones. So deplete carbohydrates first with those workouts, then move into 2 or 3 days of easy cardio for 30 to 45 minutes, and you'll find you start producing ketones pretty quick. The next very important thing is during these first 5 or 6 days, increase your electrolytes. Importantly, your salt. If you're experiencing keto flu, it is generally an electrolyte imbalance. And it's because your body is losing electrolytes, because as your insulin levels get lower doing keto, you lose electrolytes. This has been known for a long time, but it's very important if you want to combat the keto flu, you keep the electrolytes high, but you also understand that this is a natural transition of your mitochondria and your cells adapting to a new fuel source. The next one that wasn't talked about as much, that's now been fairly new in the last year or so, is the importance of stabilizing the microbiome early on. When you look at the data, you see that the microbiome shifts on the ketogenic diet are disadvantaged, like they're not exactly advantageous. They're not good for the first few months. And that's because you have a radical shift to the gut microbiome. And then after 4 or 5 months, then the microbiome actually becomes more diverse and better than it oftentimes was before, especially on a standard American diet. This is because the gut biome takes time to readjust and recalibrate, especially when all of a sudden you're reducing the starches that would normally feed the microbiome. So I firmly believe that towards the beginning, it's exceptionally important to increase fiber, because the fiber is going to feed the microbiome. And I think it's also important to add a good quality probiotic in. This is a very important piece, especially during the first few months as your body's adapting to entirely new subsets of food and fuel. Okay, I put a link for the one that I recommend. It's called Seed. Very, very cool technology, and they do a lot of stuff for the low carb community. It's not a specific low carb symbiotic. It's used throughout all different diet types, but it's the one that I use and the only one that I would really recommend, because most of them are pretty snake oily and pretty weird, honestly. So they do a lot of the research themselves. They put the money where their mouth is. They're really legit, and the technology is absolutely wicked cool. It has a capsule inside of a capsule, so cool technology, so you're getting proper delivery of the probiotic, and also has a prebiotic. That's why it's called a synbiotic. So the link down below will save you 15% off if you want to try them out, which I highly recommend no matter what kind of diet you're doing, but especially if you're doing keto, you try them out. It is definitely something that can help you adapt a little bit faster. And even if you don't feel it initially, it's going to help that transition into that ketogenic state a little bit better as far as your gut and overall microbiome is concerned. So that link down below, using code Thomas15 for 15% off. An additional hot tip that might help you through this whole process too is the more that you can just sip on some bone broth throughout this first 5, 6, 7 day period, the better off you might be too. You're changing things in your gut. That's going to help you out with some extra collagen, some gelatin, but it also just keeps you satiated. The next thing you have to learn is that insulin sensitivity in the beginning is your friend. Now, what I mean by that is you want to do whatever you can to help improve insulin sensitivity so that the carbohydrates that you do potentially consume, like even little remnants, get soaked up into the muscle really quick and don't float around in the bloodstream inhibiting ketone formation. If you have lots of glucose in the blood, you're going to stop ketones. So ketones form when glucose is lower and stable and when the body has no choice but to produce ketones. So if you're insulin resistant and your cells aren't soaking up glucose, that glucose is staying in the bloodstream, standing in the way of the liver producing ketones. So we need to remain as insulin sensitive as we can. And there's a few tips that we know now that we didn't even know 5 years ago that you can apply to remain insulin sensitive. Number one is boring, and that is adequate sleep. We did not realize how much sleep played a role with insulin sensitivity. Stop eating when it's dark out so that you can sleep better. Studies are suggesting that the more you eat with your circadian cues and daylight rhythms, the better. That's an easy one. Number 2 is green tea. Green tea is a very potent insulin sensitivity stimulator. Okay, it does this through GLUT4 translocation, helps GLUT4 come to the surface. So overall, a very good thing. EGCG as well as the antioxidants are very powerful for that. So soak up that green tea as much as you can. Adding cinnamon to whatever meals you can during this first week especially. Cinnamon is an insulin mimicker, so it helps glucose get into the cell, again, lowering those glucose levels so you can produce ketones. Apple cider vinegar is very interesting. Okay, apple cider vinegar slows down the digestion of starches. So let's say you ate a bunch of veggies and you were concerned, oh my gosh, there's a few carbs in these veggies. Apple cider vinegar used as like a dressing or even a couple tablespoons or a shot with a glass of it, whatever, that is going to slow down the breakdown of disaccharides into monosaccharides. It affects our enzymes, so we don't digest those carbs as fast, so they don't skyrocket our blood sugar as fast. Very big tip there. And a very simple one is move your body as much as you possibly can. It is called insulin-independent glucose uptake. The more you move your muscles, flexing, anything like that, walking, moving full range, that soaks more glucose up into the muscles, more than any other diet tip or hack or anything I'd throw at you. Move the body, soaks the glucose up into the cells, and you can produce ketones better. How do you know you are burning fat? How do you know you're producing ketones without testing? The telltale way is you're satiated. You feel not that hungry. And ketones do that. Ketones can blunt ghrelin levels. They can reduce hunger. But also, you just feel satiated. You're not having the whole satiation obscured by glucose spikes and falls, right? So that's a very important piece. That's number 1. Secondly, you notice an improvement in your aerobic performance. You notice that when you're exercising, hey, like I'm not gasping for air as much when I'm doing mild aerobic activity. I kind of feel like I could do my cardio longer. That's a very subjective but important thing to know that you're utilizing fat better. You also start noticing a radical shift in your focus. So when you first start keto, you get kind of foggy because your body's like grasping for glucose, but it's not quite producing ketones yet. So you're like, yeah, what the heck? But then all of a sudden, the brain starts utilizing ketones at the same time as glucose, and you're like laser focused and you feel it. Okay, so that is a very, very big one. And then the last one's kind of funny. You start noticing like sort of a fruity taste in your breath. That is called ketone breath, and it goes away, but it's a very clear indicator that you're now producing ketones. Which leads me into the next thing. How do you test your ketones? Because a lot of the stuff out there, the ketone strips are great. Those are the ones you pee on. Okay, those measure what is called acetoacetate. The problem with measuring with urine strips is that it's highly flawed in terms of how much they measure. And when you urinate, you're only measuring excess ketones. You're not measuring your actual amount. You're only measuring the excess amount of ketones that are coming out through your urine. So it doesn't tell you an accurate picture of what you're producing. It only tells you what you're excreting. So in the beginning, when your body is ruthlessly terrible at producing ketones, it just produces a bunch because it thinks it needs to, you're going to register this super high amount. Okay, but that's not indicative of what you're actually utilizing. And then a lot of people find after a few weeks, they're not registering on the ketone strips anymore. Well, that's because you're no longer producing excess ketones. You're producing just the amount you need, so they're not showing up in the urine. So people freak out. They start doing all this restrictive stuff. The reality is you're just testing via the wrong method. I recommend testing via blood or testing via breath. And if you're going to test via blood, use something like a Keto Mojo meter that tests beta-hydroxybutyrate in the blood. And if you're going to use a breath meter, I recommend that you use the BioSense because it measures fractionated breath, which measures fractionated acetone in the breath, which is a complicated discussion, but that's the only breath meter I would recommend. Otherwise, acetone is a flawed measurement as well. And you want to have your ketone levels generally above 0.5 millimole. People are going to tell you that higher ketones is better. The research now suggests that we do not chase ketones, we chase results. Okay, if you are producing a half a millimole of ketones, that means you're still producing ketones and your body is utilizing what it needs and you don't have copious extra amounts. That's fine. The higher the ketone levels sometimes does equate to better cognitive performance, but that's not the goal generally with weight loss. Okay. The other thing that we didn't talk about in previous videos that is now a thing today, measure your glucose. Monitor your glucose. Wear a continuous glucose monitor. Measure your glucose. Don't just measure your ketones. It's called the glucose ketone index, and that's the ratio of your glucose to ketones. So the higher your ketones, in theory, the better, right? Not necessarily needs to be that way, but if you have ketones at like 2 millimole, but your glucose is also high, that means you have a poor glucose to ketone ratio. Okay, but if your glucose is relatively low, like 80, 90, and your ketones are high, that's a good glucose ketone index or ratio. So you always want to look at that. So measure your glucose too, and if you had to choose one, I'd almost recommend you choose your glucose over your ketones, believe it or not. Fat adaptation. The first 3 or 4 weeks, you can expect a decrease in performance. Okay, if you work out, you might expect a little decrease in your physical performance, because what happens is the mitochondria and our cells, they need to get used to utilizing ketones. Now, ketones take a different bus into the cell than glucose does. And it's like supply and demand. It's like if all of a sudden we need a bunch of different transporters to carry ketones in, we got to build those transporters first. We can't just magically have them. So it takes time for the body to develop that transportation system. And once that transportation system is activated, then you start reaching what's called fat adaptation. And that takes in process like a couple of months to really rev up, and really like 4, 5, 6 months to really reach its peak. Okay, so you'll continue to get better and better and better and better at things with keto for like 6 months, and then after that you kind of plateau and you just enjoy it, right? Then you're adapted. It's called fat adaptation. So remember that with great power comes great responsibility, and you might have to deal with a little bit of sluggishness for a tiny bit to achieve the amazing benefit, okay? Let's talk best time to exercise to get a benefit. There's some recent research now coming out on what are called exerkines or exerkines, potato. Exerkines are molecules that are secreted by our muscles when we exercise. And there's a number of them. There's hundreds, but dozens that we really look at in research right now. And these exerkines are telling us that we get different benefits from exercise at different times. And flash forward to overall like what we need with keto. The evidence suggests that training in the morning in a ketogenic state is going to allow for more beneficial ketone formation and better glycemic response. What that means is training in the morning, specifically with keto, really works well. You'll produce more ketones and you'll modulate glucose better. You can work out whenever you want though. Just move. I don't want to get too nuancy and broken up in it, but if you want to produce more ketones, the morning is the best time for someone on a ketogenic diet. What are the best proteins to eat? Now, a lot of this has changed because we used to say just eat the fattiest cuts of meat that you possibly can, but the more that we realize with this, what we call regression to the mean with the ketogenic diet, we realize that although the human body is what's called an open thermodynamic system, meaning we still look at physics and math with thermodynamics, but we also understand that as an open thermodynamic system, our body has a lot of variance day to day with how many calories we actually need, so much to the point that it's very, very, very difficult to measure. However, thermodynamics do still apply. So what we're finding is that, okay, if someone is doing a ketogenic diet and they're only eating fatty cuts of meat and they're ending up at 4,000 calories per day and they're gaining weight and don't know why, it's tough because maybe they're getting too many calories in their meat and they don't realize it. Now, there's nuance here, of course, with the Randall cycle and all kinds of different things. That's complex, but I say that as a disclaimer because that could be misconstrued, right? Point is that I recommend going from lean to moderate fat cuts of meat. Okay, so chicken, maybe some leaner steaks, some leaner fillets, maybe some New Yorks that don't have copious amounts of fat. And if you have a ribeye, maybe have it a couple times a week or something like that. Don't be afraid of it, but kind of remember those rules about the fat quantities that I talked about. I would still argue that eggs are probably the best protein source on keto, just because the abundant amino acid profile, abundant EAA profile. Fish are probably a close second, and then kind of the other meats that kind of come in there. And then of course, if you need to supplement with some protein powders, I don't think it's the end of the world if you need to get your protein allotment up. I think one of the most important things you can remember on a newer age ketogenic diet is prioritize protein above the fats. Okay, you will have more flexibility if you prioritize protein than if you prioritize fat. If you prioritize fat, you might accidentally go overboard way easier than you would with protein. Veggies. With veggies, some of the research has changed, but a lot of what's changed is my opinion and my own experiences. I'm going to go ahead and say if it's leafy, if it's green, if it's cruciferous, and especially if it's fibrous, eat as much of it as you want. Okay, first of all, I highly doubt that you're going to end up with like 40 grams of net carbs from vegetables. And if you do, I actually applaud you, because you're probably going to be so satiated from that much in the way of veggies that you'll probably lose some serious weight. Okay, so even if you were knocked out of ketosis. So don't chase ketones, chase results. Stop worrying so much about that broccoli kicking you out of keto that you're missing the forest through the trees, okay? You still want to lose some weight. And I know people are anti-veggie, and I know there's the carnivore community that believes a certain thing, and there's the vegan community that believes a certain thing, but I still believe in food quantity. And I think that vegetables have a lot of benefit when it comes down to a ketogenic diet, purely from a satiety and fiber standpoint. So again, I doubt you're going to hit 30 or 40 grams of net carbs when it comes down to vegetables. So for all intents and purposes, just if it's leafy and green, just eat it, okay? Now, regarding net carbs with everything else, you do need to be concerned with things like almonds and all the various nuts, right? With nuts, those carbs add up, and they add up quick. You don't realize it. But you know what else they add up in? Calories. 1 ounce of almonds, we're talking close to 200 calories. You see what I'm talking about? It doesn't take much, and it's a small handful, and you're like, there's 200 calories, there's 200 calories. I just don't think you should lean into nuts. And if you do lean into nuts, lean into macadamia nuts that seem to be more satiating and at least have a more of a metabolic benefit. They're also one of the lowest carb nuts. So definitely recommend macadamia nuts. Macadamia nuts, pili nuts, Sacha Inchi seeds are sort of my big three when it comes down to the nuts that you would eat a lot of. And the good news is they're kind of expensive, so you're probably not going to eat a ton of them anyway. So instead of saying almonds are cheap, so I'm going to eat a crap load of those, say I'm going to go for the expensive nuts so I don't eat a lot of them and get more of a benefit. Just trust me on that. Fiber should be a priority shortly behind protein. I think protein before fiber. But fiber, here's the interesting thing. Especially if it's soluble fiber, I think you're going to be able to get away with a lot more than what people think. Okay, fiber ferments in the gut and it converts into something called butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid, which if you want me to get biochemical on you, butyrate is only one hydroxy group away from beta hydroxybutyrate, which is a ketone body. And there's some rodent model evidence from decades ago that actually suggests that butyrate may actually help promote beta hydroxybutyrate formation. What that simply means is more fiber might actually help you produce more ketones. And I have experienced that firsthand anecdotally. So I can't Scouts honor say that this is exactly what the research says and 100% evidence-based, but I can say it's partially rodent model evidence-based and Thomas DeLauer anecdotally based. So aim for the fiber, go for the skies, go all the way. Interesting newer stuff surrounding fruit, specifically berries. Fruit is made up of a couple of different types of sugar: fructose, glucose, and sucrose, which is a hybrid of fructose and glucose together. You want to opt for fruits that have more fructose. Fructose does not spike insulin, or it does in a very small amount. So fructose does not inhibit ketogenesis when it's in a small amount. So you can get away with having probably up to 3/4 of a cup or a cup of fruit per day, especially if it's right before or after a workout. I'm going to leave that right there and just let that stew, because sometimes that fruit is all you need to satisfy that sweet craving. And test your ketones. If you eat the fruit and it kicks you out, then maybe you shouldn't do it. But I can almost argue that most of you are going to be able to have some fruit. The best sweeteners, in my opinion, this is revamped a little bit. Allulose is one of my favorites now. Okay, allulose is interesting because it also has the power to sort of bind to the same transporter that glucose would bind to. So if you sprinkled some allulose on fruit, you could actually reduce the amount of carbohydrates that are absorbed into the bloodstream from the fruit. Okay, so allulose is one of my favorites. Next up is going to be monk fruit. Shortly after that is going to be stevia. Then kind of bottom of the barrel, I like it, but it just barely makes the cut, is erythritol. Erythritol is still a sugar alcohol. I still think that it's not the best thing if you're gonna have a ton of it, but I think little bits here and there for baking and stuff like that, totally fine. What drinks can you load up on? Coffee, tea, heck, you can have diet soda if you want. Let's just make it easy. I don't think it's the best thing, but sure. Things like Zevia, things like carbonated water, those are all fine. Okay, just avoid things that have carbs. Okay, I love to drink like just sweet tea that's sweetened with like stevia or something throughout the course of the day. Alcohol is going to take priority from the liver to digest it and to deal with it, to metabolize it. Okay, it is a poison, it is a toxin, so that means ketone formation and all other forms of metabolism take a back seat to the alcohol metabolism. Okay, lots of studies now demonstrating suppression of melatonin, suppression of overall digestive enzymes, all kinds of things, elevations in cortisol that are chronic, affecting pancreatic cells, okay, through kind of like changing diversion of blood flow. Alcohol, not good stuff when it comes down to insulin resistance, when it comes down to ketone formation. So I would just say 1 or 2 times per week, try to limit the amount. I know there's keto wines and things like out there, but remember, you're missing the forest through the trees. Keto is good because it forces you to go back to whole foods and really being like authentic with what you choose. So if you're making the concerted effort, then try.
All of these pockets are easy to access with one hand as the bag sits securely around your body. You can even
try to reduce the alcohol. Every 8 weeks, you should reevaluate your calories. Okay, because every 8 weeks, the body tends to kind of shift metabolically, not on the clock, but roughly based on research every 8 weeks or so. What this means is if you are looking at your calories and you're really having low calories at 8 weeks, you might want to take a 2-week break and then go back for another 8 weeks. It's called a diet break, and 8 weeks seems to be the magic number. So diet for 8 weeks, then take 2 weeks off. That 2 weeks off does not mean that you need to add carbs. It just means you increase your calories. You're not magically losing weight because ketones are magical. You're losing weight because of thermodynamic effects, but also just because of various different open thermodynamic systems, the Randle cycle, and a number of other things that come into play with the ketogenic diet. Take a break now and then, especially every 8 weeks. It's a perfect time to reset and recalibrate. Supplements that I think are critical now for the ketogenic diet. One person or 2 people or 1 million people might say, if you need supplements, it's not a wholesome diet. And I do kind of agree with that. However, on a ketogenic diet, I think there's room for optimization through proper supplementation. It's not about filling a gap, so to speak. However, I challenge you to really get enough magnesium in your diet these days, really, because it's so